This is a letter to the developers of Rust, an homage to OG Rust players, and a peace treaty towards the new and old survivors of the wasteland. This is a chit-chat and hopefully a compromise of some sort. I want to talk about the current state of Rust after the recent World Update 2.0. Also, I want to talk about the state of PvP and the nature of hardcore survival games. My friend Toasty here will be helping me today. Toasty, can you show our guests what we'll be talking about today? Thanks, Toasty. If you want to skip to a part of our chat, you can do so below with the timestamps in the timeline or the description below. Some of the stuff we'll be talking about today might be a little bit controversial and a minority opinion, but nonetheless, it's still important to talk about. The first thing that I want to get across is the talk that everyone's had on social media with this new update, the World Update 2.0, the biggest update since 2022. Do you guys remember what happened in 2022? That's right, it's the Recoil update. And ever since then, the developers and the community, they've been looking for a way to either convert the casual audience into a more hardcore audience the way it was like back in the days, or reintroduce OG players into the wasteland. I happen to be one of the OG players from Legacy. And back in the day, there were so many cool things that you could come back to Rust for. So many things that made Rust different from other games. And I'm not just talking about Recoil. I'm talking about the adventures, the stories, the people that you met in the wasteland, the base building, the clans, all of it. There were so many cool reasons to come back to Rust. Things that defined what Rust was, what made Rust different, and why you played Rust over other games. Now, in the past couple years, you've kind of seen that Rust has tried to become more or less like other games that already exist. You've got Valorant, you've got Minecraft, right? If you want to play a fast-paced action shooter, you could play Valorant. If you want to play a base building game, you could play Minecraft. But Rust has slowly lost its identity over the past couple years due to the desire to get new players into the wasteland. Why they did it the way they did it? I don't know. I don't know. And it seems like the entire strategy behind the developers of Rust, their entire idea was to make it more simple, more accessible for new players to enter the wasteland with less competition. And the way they did that was by chopping down the competition from the top, taking away the thing that made Rust what it was into what they thought it could be. Now, the incentive behind what they were trying to make was a good idea, but the implementation of these ideas was very inaccurate. The things they've done to Rust, the way they've changed it, has created basically a new game, a new environment. And it's no longer a game that is defined by its difference and uniqueness. Rust is now more accessible, more free, more open to new player experiences, and it was at the cost of what made Rust special. One of the odd things you may have found in the wasteland that the developers have been slowly adding back into the game is memorabilia from the Legacy times, my times. And it's kind of odd to see, because what made Rust special was not these iconic items, the textures, the unique locations. What made Rust special is a lot more deep than that. And you can tell that the developers are really trying to give it their best effort to bring in old players. And I will applaud them for their efforts to try and make Rust what it once was. If you want to bring back in the OG audience, you have to give the OG audience what they love and what they desire. It's gonna take more than just furnace skins and Radtown. As cool as Radtown used to be back in the days, it's not what made Rust Rust. It was a part of Rust, but it was not what made Rust so different. and so special to people. The new base building system is pretty sweet, and it is something that still makes Rust slightly different, is that the developers have really went out of their way to make sure that bases are as cool as they can be. You might find that in other base building games like Minecraft, that the base building can be very clunky, and that sometimes you don't always get what you're looking for, and it's very hard sometimes to get a correct shape, to get a correct outcome with your build. But the way that the Rust developers have put a lot of time and effort into building, that is something that we can give them a lot of credit for. They definitely know how to create an environment in which you can build pretty much anything that you can think of. I mean, look at me and Toasty's cabin. It's pretty nice, right? Toasty likes it. Toasty, what do you think of the new building techniques? Yeah, I agree. One of the things that's been plaguing the Wasteland the past couple years is cheaters, and they've always existed in some form or fashion, in some degree, but not like this. Cheaters are now trying and attempting to hide their cheats in very, very smart and undetectable ways. Now, back in the day, it was very obvious who was cheating and who was not. Shoot, we even had a place for them to live. It was called Hacker Valley. This is where anyone who was cheating could freely go, and if you were cheating, we all knew it. There was no reason to hide it. We knew what your base looked like. We knew you were flying in the air, and the Hacker Valley was the most open area in the entire map. This made it so that anyone who went into that area was instantly killed. But recently, there's been a new type of player. Somebody who uses ESP, also known as wall hacks, to see through walls and camp outside of an angle using a DB. Now, I'm not opposed to roaming around with a DB, but if you are openly running around as a naked with a DB, you are kind of setting the expectation that you might be someone malicious. It's not normal in a survival game to be running around naked with a weapon. Shoot, even if you're running around with a DB, which are not super uncommon, but if you are running around with one, it does kind of point the finger that you might be doing something weird. Because, as me and Toasty both know, guarding somebody's door is one of the easiest ways to get loot in the Wasteland. And if you're already naked, not wearing anything, and only carrying a DB, you might just be someone who's cheating. Not saying that everyone who runs around naked with a DB is cheating, but it is kind of odd. Now, another reason, before we go on to our next point, that someone might be running around with a DB is because that people are now running around in groups. And in groups, people have a variability of guns. Which brings me to my next point. There is almost no reason to run around the Wasteland with an AK. This is a point that is mainly focused on the Recoil update of 2022. Now, I know the newer audience is going to be like, but sorbet, the new Recoil, don't stop talking about Recoil, it's so good, just play the game. Listen, the Recoil update was probably the biggest update in Rust's entire history, and there have been a lot of updates in Rust's history. There have been so many updates that have changed so many different things that are unique to Rust, but the Recoil update changed Rust all the way down to its very bottom root, okay? The reason people came back to the Wasteland, the reason they mainly played Rust, the reason that someone almost died in a tournament to play Rust, the reason that so many people sat in Discords, in Discord calls, on Discord Messenger, downloaded the Rust app that let you know when you were getting raided, the reason so many people went hardcore in this game was because of the Recoil, okay? Whether you like it or don't like it, that is part of Rust's history, and that will always be part of the Rust lore. It will always be part of Rust. Rust was basically made off of its Recoil. People back in the day, whether you did or didn't play Rust, if you knew someone who played Rust, you looked at them differently because you knew they were a different type of person and who would sit through the most painful of gaming experiences of all time. You knew that they played for the salt. You knew that their blood ran high with sodium chloride. You knew they were on the edge of a heart attack every single day, and they loved every single minute of it. With that being said, in the past couple years, people have not been going out with very high tier weapons, no one usually goes out with a bolty, no one usually goes out with an AK, unless they're in a group. And there's almost no point to going out with anything but something that isn't the AK. And that's because nowadays you can do the same thing that you're going to do with the AK with pretty much any other weapon. So now any gun that can spray at any high rate of fire is worth taking over the AK, because the AK costs a lot to make and other guns don't. And they do exactly the same thing. Now, one of the things I didn't expect with the Recoil update is how much it would change the dynamics of raiding. And if you've played Rust in the past couple of years, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, raiding is almost non-existent anymore. At least not in the way that we used to know it. Rust used to be about getting guns, getting gear, getting food, getting medical supplies, making sure your base is not being raided, and if it is, defending it. But then, if you could make it that far into the wipe, eventually at some point you would end up raiding somebody else's base. Nowadays, you don't even see people raiding at all. Very rarely will you come across a group or a singular person who is actively trying to raid somebody else's base. It might happen when they're offline, it might happen in the blink of an eye, but you will never at this point in time find someone who's doing a high-scale raid whilst the opposing group is online. You almost never see it anymore. You're always waiting to make sure they're offline, you're always waiting to make sure that you have more than enough resources to raid. You never see someone try to take a chance on a opportunity to destroy somebody else's base and everything they've worked for, and dare I say it, be a champion of the wasteland. You just don't see it anymore. It's almost not something that exists in Rust. And it's very odd to see, because raiding is one of the things that made Rust what Rust was. It was what made Rust different and better than every other survival game, is that the fact that you could build a base and then raid somebody else's. If you wanted to, you could also destroy all of their supplies, you could destroy all of their sleeping bags, you could take away all of their vehicles, their horses, their items, you could take away everything from them, and that was part of the wipe. But nowadays, people don't even play up until that point, and if they do, they just don't take advantage of what that part of the game offers. And it's very weird to see. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect it. Something I mentioned earlier about Rust becoming like other games is something I want to hit on one more time, because it's something that not only affects Rust, our wasteland, our beloved place of belonging, making enemies, making friends, creating unique stories, and living out this fantasy that we're all surviving in this wasteland as nobodies. And eventually becoming the hero that we knew we always could be. But a lot like other development studios, a lot like other games, Rust has slowly been blending into the backdrop of other games, other genres, and Rust used to be super unique in that anyone who played Rust knew what they were getting into. It was a hardcore survival shooter game, right? You get guns, you survive, sometimes you run into other players and you talk to them, but at the end of the day, you're playing something that was very different from everything else that existed at the time. Now, one of the things you may have noticed, and I've definitely noticed, is that the gaming landscape is becoming very much corporate, in the way that development studios are now creating games and modeling their games off of the success of other games and trying to use a framework to maximize profit to the eventual downfall of their hardcore player base. And it's very sad to see, but Rust is also going down that path. And this is part of the reason why we're having a talk today, is so that hopefully someone can pass this message along to the person who can make the big decisions, to someone who can really create a difference in this world and bring back the playground of the wasteland that we used to know. Give us a reason to come back to the home that we had away from everything else in the real world. There's a clip I want you to see of me earlier today over at Oxum's trying to battle it out with a couple of people that had some weapons, and I was able to snag a revolver as they downed this solo player. But the way that I felt in this situation, the way I felt after I had gotten killed, was a very much resemblance of how Rust is today and what it feels like to play Rust. I went against two players. Notably, I didn't have the upper hand when it came to fighting these players because they did have the numbers, but I was able to get a revolver and land a few good shots. But using that revolver, it felt a lot like Valorant, and I want you to see what I saw and experience what I experienced, and maybe this will get the point across as to how it feels to play Rust today. And I don't just want to see my vision for the wasteland come true, right? That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is hopefully that we can find a compromise, that we can find a balance. And I've got some ideas. I've got some big ideas. As someone who's played this game since it was pretty much a baby, I can see what it has become and what it's becoming, and I don't think it's a very good future. If you've seen other games, you can see how over time there have been this slow decline of players and hardcore dedicated audience members in their numbers, and recently Rust has had this slow downfall, and it's slowly going down this path that other games are going down. And I've got some ways that maybe we can stop that from happening, or even reverse the problem entirely. Now, I could have gone to the forums, I could have gone anywhere else on social media to maybe make a difference and talk about these problems to people who also agree, but I don't want to do that. I want to try my darndest, my hardest, and my best to hopefully solve this problem for this game that I so dearly love, right? I don't think everyone has it in them to really speak out and say what they're thinking, because it's first off a minority opinion probably, but a lot of change and compromise comes at the cost of other people, and sometimes to achieve balance you need to give up certain things, and you also need to be willing to receive certain things. Now, I'm not saying that the developer should only take my ideas, but what I am saying is that I think I have found what I consider to be an objectively good balance. Now, I'll talk about that in another talk, but I have started these little chats in efforts to maybe get someone out there who can make these changes happen. I don't want these changes to just happen for me. I want them to happen for everyone, and I want everyone in the wasteland to feel like they're welcome somewhere. The last thing I want to say is that I miss old Rust. And I know what some of you might say. With Sorbet, it's better this way. Rust is better. Rust is more welcoming. It's more friendly to new players. And while that may be true, what made Rust, what made it so special and so unique were the things that made it different and the things that made it difficult. And the people who came into this wasteland usually knew what they were going to get into and expected it. And there was a beautiful thing about the way people talked about Rust back in the days, and that was a position of reverence and honor to someone's dedication to even come into the wasteland for even a week. For someone to join in on the first day of a wipe and to really try to experience what Rust could offer through sheer will, grind, practice, and knowledge of the wasteland. And there was something super magical in the air with players, with events, with new updates, with clans, with solos. Everyone was connected in some way in the wasteland back in the day. And that is something that has severely been missing. If you've probably noticed, servers have been trying to get in new players, especially community ones, and it's been a burden that's on everyone's shoulders to try and get new players into the wasteland. But I'm going to be honest, I don't think updates like the one that just came out today are going to change Rust into the thing that we want it to be unless we change it, unless we speak out, unless someone who can make the changes happen that need to happen, I don't think Rust is going to become what people hope it will be. And like many other games, like many other communities online, Rust is unfortunately heading down the same path. And anyone else who's been in this sphere of the internet in the past 5 years also knows exactly what I'm talking about. These communities, these tight-knit groups, these core audience members who call themselves hardcore are slowly being pushed out in the name of profit, in the name of new player experience, in the name of greed, money, and it's sad to see. And hopefully someone can make something happen. Hopefully I can get enough people to understand this message, understand where I'm coming from. Hopefully we can all come to a compromise and find the balance. Like I said, I have some ideas and I'm going to be talking about them. Hopefully someone can hear me out. Hopefully someone can at least implement the option for these balance changes to exist. And if not, I can't see myself existing in the wasteland for too much longer. Me and Toasty here are some of the last players standing, and it's kind of hard to see that come to fruition. I didn't ever think it would come to this point in time. I used to call Rust the God game, and what that means is Rust was, in my mind, going to be one of those games that surpassed time and surpassed generations, and always had a replayable factor to it. Like the best games, the most played games, the most hardcore audience, the most long-lived games are games that have changed the least. Take Counter-Strike, for example. Counter-Strike has changed probably the least out of every game in existence to have ever existed. In the past 20 years of Counter-Strike, the only thing that I can really say changed is they added an R8 revolver and they added some new dynamic to the smoke. That's it. Some other small things have changed here and there, some very, very small things, but they always managed to keep their core audience members together, and over time, people just slowly became more hardcore for the game. And that's what I was thinking Rust was going to become. I used to be one of those people who couldn't wait to come back to the wasteland, who couldn't wait to come back to lose, to be salty, to learn, to grow, to become part of the community, and to spend my time, my money that I haven't already spent. By the way, I've spent thousands of dollars not only buying the game, skin, and equipment to take part in Rust, but also to get better at Rust. I spent thousands of dollars on a monitor just so I could learn the recoil pattern. If you weren't there for the old recoil, you had to have a decent monitor to be able to run Rust at a rate to where you can actually control it. That's actually one of the reasons people bought faster monitors in the past, and that was one of the things that set up these monitor making companies to start really pushing out high-end monitors, was because of Rust. Now, it was also slightly because of Apex and Counter-Strike and Fortnite and all that, but Rust was one of the games where it was almost required to have a fast monitor if you wanted to be competitive. You knew it. Everyone knew it, because it was part of the core game. I think that's it for me and Toasty today. The sun's coming up, it's shining. I think we're gonna go out and see if we can loot a couple nakeds. We're gonna go stand at the side of the road and see if we can catch some people off guard by hiding in a bush. But I hope you guys will come back to the cabin for these talks. I hope we can understand each other on a deeper level. And who knows, maybe I might get somebody in the cabin to talk about potential changes and maybe discuss community ideas, get some opinions out. I think that would be a really cool idea. What do you think, Toasty? Alright, well, thank you for coming into the cabin today. Thank you for listening to us talk. Me and Toasty, like I said, we're signing off.